Maureen Lay.
I just wanted to ask a question about education and where you see it, first of all, for the state of Ohio, and then where you see it going or heading in the next couple of years for the entire country.
Well, first let me say education is very important. You know, an educated population, that's the way to people to raise their standard of living, quality of life, and all that. And especially too, when you've had so many people lose their job, displaced workers, retraining. I had an opportunity to meet an industrialist. He's older now and ill health, but one of the conversations I had with him that was really an education to me was he had operations all over the world, okay? And you know what he said? He said that technology is changing so fast, we can't retrain our workers fast enough. We need an educated workforce. So education is really important for us to be a strong country. Now, I believe that education ought to be the responsibility for local and state governments and a lot less at the federal level. I mean, we've got a big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., and when that's, you know, just, when you have a big bureaucracy like that, it just causes more unfunded mandates, it causes strings attached, it just causes red tape, it just doesn't work well. So I have always been a strong proponent for charter schools and vouchers because that put a little competition in the public education system, which would be healthy. I sit on the Ohio Senate Education Committee, and this spring, when we were doing working on the budget, there was some testimony coming from some African American kids from Dayton that the principal at one of the schools started a charter school. I guess the Dayton City School Board was involved with it, and they came in and testified how important it was to keep these kids in that charter school because these kids were flourishing. And the chance, if they had to go back to the Dayton City Public Schools, the chance of them being successful is very slim. And so it does work. Apparently, the charter schools would do some things because they don't have all the restrictions that the public schools have, and that's where the little competition comes in. And there's some other things I think you know what I'm talking about. So, but if we can keep it, just about everything we do in government, we can keep it more local and state and less federal, we'll be better off because federal government doesn't do a whole lot right anyways. There's a lot of things, and they always have huge bureaucracies and costs, and maybe we can get into some of those other areas, but I think that's how you fix education. You've got to get families involved and parents. And parents, there's a responsibility there too. And but if you can keep them more local, and then we also need to partner more with employers and businesses in the communities. Need to become partners of the education system, and because we're just getting really stepped over by our foreign competition. You know, in the areas of science and math and engineering, we're getting killed, and we're not. That's also starts to risk our national security and our strength as a nation.
We have to understand this. The job of a congressman is to represent the people of this district at the federal government level. That being said, the federal government has no constitutional authority to be involved in the education of your or my children. None. Until 1977, there was no, 1979, there was no Department of Education, although the federal government was already meddling into the affairs of education at the local level prior to that under the U.S. Department of Interior, of all things. When they finally got their grubby paws on the education system, they created a huge bureaucracy that cost a whole lot of money to support annually. And primarily their function has been to support the teachers' unions. I don't see how that benefits educating my grandchildren. When we send $1 to Washington, D.C., tax money out of our pocket, and then they send us back 15 cents of it, we're supposed to say thank you. But even to get that 15 cents, such as this Race to the Top program, I call it Rocket to the Top, I think it's silly. We got $400 million back recently. I'm sure y'all read the news articles on that, back to the state of Ohio for the education. Hello, it was our money, we sent it to them in the first place. Why do we have to beg Washington, D.C. and sit down and write some essay describing why we deserve the money back here in our district? No, what we need to do is tell Washington, D.C., keep your hands off of our money and keep your hands off of our kids. We'll educate our children in our local areas. And if the money needs to come from the state, that's where it needs to be debated. The programs for schools need to come down to the districts, and I urge every parent and grandparent to start getting involved down at the district level. Don't wait until Washington, D.C. is telling you what you have to teach your children and ruling out even teaching them what the Constitution is. It's going to be too late then. Get involved now at the local level. It's not one of the powers of the federal government. It's one of the states and the people. That's my position on this. And that's what I will do. I will fight as hard as I can, every possible way that I can, to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education, among other entities in Washington, D.C. that have no constitutional authority whatsoever to even exist.
Any more questions from the floor? Dan.
This is my first chance. I've hosted these and I've never actually asked a question. That's my own thinking here. Ohio 18 project started when Mr. Space voted for the first health care bill. Jason was there. We asked him not to vote for that bill. And the initial one he did. And then he changed his vote, but that's a whole story in itself. We really know that he didn't. So that's my pet peeve. I've never heard anybody really ask about how do we reverse the president's health care bill. And on the abortion issue, what's in that health care bill, supposedly it was not being funded, but yet I hear constantly that now it is. So kind of a combo. How do we repeal the health care bill? How do we stop this direction on abortion that we're going now?
I don't know which is most disruptive, turning that on or off, or banging it when I lay it down. To repeal the health care bill, I suppose there's several options. One of them would be to simply not fund it, not vote for funding it, which would be, a possibility as a congressman is just not funded. Of course, you'd have to have a lot of support to be able to do that. Then there's other methods. One of them is simple nullification. And there's a movement on and across this country right now to nullify it. Because the U.S. Constitution happens to say that the laws that are passed have to be pursuant to the U.S. Constitution. And in the health care issue, blatantly, it doesn't even hide the fact that it trumps all over our individual rights. Last summer during the health care debates, I watched C-SPAN a lot, and they had the debate in the Senate Finance Committee as to, it was 6 hours long. I sat and watched it. And the question was, is how much are we going to charge if people don't buy health care insurance? This is ridiculous. You could ask my wife if she were here, but at that moment I stood up and almost started pulling my hair out. That I couldn't believe that U.S. Congress, senators were actually discussing whether I should have to buy something or not to be a citizen. It's ridiculous. I don't know what's going to happen in Congress because we're just going to be a wait and see thing as far as who ends up being the leadership in Congress. If I were to get elected, I'm going to vote for Ron Paul to be the speaker so we can actually table things like this and have a debate in Congress on them, not just some political entities that are going to do what they have to do to stay in office. Defund it, vote to eliminate it, vote to overthrow it, vote to appeal it, vote work in every possible way to simply get rid of it. I don't know what all, beyond what I just mentioned, what all the other options are, but I would try at least the two that I mentioned, I would advocate for. Was there a second part to that question?
The abortion.
Abortion.
I mean, basically, abortion's now being funded.
Yeah, I understand the same thing. I've read and heard on news the same report. Well, you know, that also makes it unconstitutional. I mean, it's a whole life issue there. It's totally ridiculous the federal government would even be involved in such a thing to mandate people that, you know, that your tax money is going to end up paying for killing human beings. It has to be fought. It has to be fought every way possible. My belief is that most of the stuff's going to end up in court. You know, the state of Ohio, I don't know where the state of Ohio right now is on this issue, but I know the state of Virginia and the state of Florida are already in litigation over it.
Well, I'll start with the abortion part. There's absolutely no way that taxpayer dollars should fund abortions. Of course, I don't think we should have abortions legal in the country anyways, but we certainly shouldn't have taxpayer funding of it. On the health care, we will vote to repeal health care when we take the majority back, okay? And my guess is President Obama will probably veto that legislation, the bill. And so then what will happen, we will not fund it, okay? And this is where people, Americans, are going to have to be part of the team effort here, because I can envision sometime early next year, there'll be a big boo-ha-ha over the budget because we're not going to fund it. And Congress and the administration is we're in the majority. So the American people are going to have to stand with us, and that'll be interesting to see how that scenario goes down. And then obviously then it'll become a huge presidential issue, election issue in 2 years, and I think that they will use them against them. So the good part about the health care, there's no good parts, but the part that's being implemented now is the taxes and all the nonsense. And the entitlement part, because it's an entitlement, doesn't take effect. So it's easier to get people that aren't going to be on it to wean them from it. So that's the only bright aspect I see of that. But we need to repeal it for sure. It's going to bankrupt America if they don't bankrupt America first on all their other nonsense. And obviously I support what the attorney generals are doing here around about half the states now, I guess. But that will probably take a while. Changing the U.S. Constitution is not an easy task, which is, some good aspects why that is. But I know I've had conversations with the next speaker, and he said that we're not going to fund it. And so it's going to be a big battle next year. That could be one of the biggest battles. I think the first battle we're going to have is when they come and want to raise the debt ceiling for spending, which is what they're going to do in lame duck, and then they're going to have to do it again early in the next Congress. So the Tea Party movement and the Americans waking up, don't deactivate. The real work starts in January, and issues like getting rid of Obamacare, and we do need some health care reforms, and what we need to do is address the escalating costs. And how we do that is defensive medicine, portability, I'll do by health insurance across state lines, medical savings accounts for routine preventative care, things that would lower the administration costs for doctors, because you use those medical savings accounts to pay for your routine care and not pay co-insurance and file with all those insurance companies. There would be more personal responsibility to people and a better relationship with their physicians. And encourage states to develop programs for medically uninsured group pools with incorporating free market principles with the private sector, and let the states be the laboratories to figure out that problem, because as society we're paying for it anyways. We got to figure out how to address that, and I think let the states work on